I'm Michael, 46, and the only time my name mattered in that family was when money was involved." "They really left it all to him?" Sean scoffed. Then the lawyer read the final line, and the room went still. I hadn't even known I was in the will, let alone holding the entire $12 million estate in my hands. But trust me, silence is rarely the end of the story. Sometimes it's the start of the fight. If this hits close to home, tell me, what city are you listening from tonight? They laughed when the lawyer said my name. Not because it was funny, but because it never used to matter. I stood a few steps behind Evelyn, shoulders squared and palms still from the nervous cold. That moment carried years of silence with it. Dad once told me, "People don't listen until money's on the table." And he was right. My footsteps in that old marble lobby had gone unnoticed until inheritance made me worth a glance. I hadn't planned to come. I'd thought about staying home, letting them parse his will without me. But I remembered Dad's cameo smile one Sunday morning years ago, when he found me painting a faded portrait of his Chevy. For a second, he paused. I took it as proof he'd seen me, even when no one else did. So here I was, late to the reading in that small-town courthouse of Glen Ridge, Ohio. I stepped past walnut-paneled walls, walked under low slats of dusty blinds, and took a seat on the back row where I hoped no one would find me. Evelyn was already there, leaning forward as if riding an unseen wave of attention. I caught her eye. I thought I saw surprise, but she only looked away and slid her phone into a leather pocketbook. When the lawyer motioned me forward, she made her remark. "We didn't think you'd come. Figured you'd be busy painting." No emotion, just ice in her voice, sharpened by intent. I swallowed, controlled the urge to flinch, and nodded once. Howard adjusted his glasses. He'd been Dad's attorney for years, stern, always impeccable, his tone measured as a judge's gavel. It was a ritual: name, date, relations. Then the moment passed. He cleared his throat. "With regard to the Dorsey estate, everything, including the family home valued at $12 million, has been left to Michael James Dorsey." Silence. The clock ticked, louder now, each chime a spotlight on my name. I watched Sean's head snap back, his confident smirk freezing. Haley blinked once as though waking from a dream. Evelyn pursed her lips until I thought she might snap them shut. And then the laughter came. Low at first, like a rumbling thunder. Sean leaned back, eyes cold as marble. Laughter twisted into harsh words, before fading into heavy, arrested breath. I stayed silent. Didn't smile, didn't protest. I only reached for the next envelope on the table, the one sealed with red wax. My name stamped on the front, my whole world encapsulated in a folded rectangle. I glanced around the courtroom. Faces stared. My father was gone, but I felt him there. Silent. Purposeful. I could almost hear his voice. "If you don't speak, they'll hear louder what you leave behind." I squeezed the envelope, letting the wax press into the pad of my thumb. When I stood, chairs scraped and bodies shifted. A cold draft moved through the room. It felt like the last breath of the house we'd left behind. As I stepped out into the wind-swept steps, I could still feel the echoes of that laughter. But more than that, I carried an unfamiliar weight in my coat pocket, something more tangible than grief or regret. It was proof that I mattered now. My phone buzzed, one soft alert. I paused, finger chalking the screen. A message from Evelyn. "We need to talk." I didn't respond. I knew the moment had changed everything. They say truth comes in words. Maybe. But sometimes it arrives wrapped in deeper silence, packed inside a red-waxed envelope, carried out into the cold, and left ringing in an empty pocket. The house smelled like cedar and dust, just like him. But my old art studio? That still smelled like me. Oil, charcoal, linseed. The same scent that clung to my hands back when I thought painting could fix things. I parked out back, where the gravel always shifted beneath the tires. The faded swing on the oak tree still creaked, even without wind. One of the ropes had unraveled halfway, like it gave up mid-motion. I paused by it, ran my fingers along the worn wooden seat. I'd carved a tiny M on it when I was 12. Dad never noticed, or if he did, he never said. The back door stuck like always, the bottom edge swollen from too many damp seasons. I shouldered it open and stepped into the kitchen. Nothing had changed. Same lined-up canisters, the same ticking clock above the sink. My stepmother Evelyn must have kept it neat. Or maybe it just stayed frozen in time after he passed. Either way, it felt untouched. I didn't speak. Just let my boots echo softly on the tile. The air had a weight to it, like memory had been steeping here for years. I passed the hallway where we used to hang winter coats, the stair rail Dad would sand every spring, the living room couch where he fell asleep during war documentaries. But I didn't come back for any of that. I came for the studio. It was still down the same narrow hallway, past the pantry, across from the guest bathroom. The door, white with smudges of gray paint on the edge, was slightly ajar. Just like I'd left it. I hadn't opened it in 10 years, but someone had. Or maybe it never closed all the way. That's the thing about doors in this house. They remember how you leave them. The room was smaller than I remembered. Or maybe I'd just grown up too much to fit back inside. The light through the northern window was soft and bluish, just like the light I used to chase with brushes. My easel still stood near the corner, holding an unfinished portrait of a faceless man in a flannel coat. My paints had dried in their tins, tubes curling in on themselves like they were tired of waiting. I stepped closer. The smell hit me. Turpentine, paper, old wood. My world, suspended in a space no one else had touched. Dad never came in here. He'd walk by sometimes, glance in, but never cross the threshold. Once I asked why. "It's your space," he said. But he never said, "Your work." Not once. I stood in the center and turned slowly, scanning every shelf, every drawer. My old sketchbooks were still stacked against the radiator. Crumpled drafts and thumbtacked notes clung to the corkboard. Even the stool, the one with the loose leg, waited like an old friend I never quite finished a conversation with. I sat. The silence was thick. Not hostile, just aware. Like the room knew I wasn't the same, and neither was it. That's when I saw it. A slip of white sticking out behind the bookshelf. Almost nothing. Just a corner of an envelope yellowed with time. I pulled it out. My name written in Dad's sharp handwriting across the front. Michael. No last name. No date on the outside. But inside, I expected pages. An apology, maybe? Or some kind of truth. Instead, I found nothing. Just the salutation. Michael. And then blank space. Nothing else. Not a word. Just a void where a sentence should have been. I sat there for a long while, the letter trembling slightly in my fingers. Did he stop writing? Did he get interrupted? Did he just not know what to say? The blankness said more than anything he could have written. Some goodbyes come unfinished, just like most of the art I left in that room. I put the letter back inside the envelope and tucked it into my coat pocket. It felt heavy, even without the weight of words. That night I couldn't sleep. The house was too quiet, too still. But just past midnight, I heard the swing creak again. One long groan of rope and wood, even though the wind hadn't stirred a single leaf. I didn't check. Some things in this house moved without needing permission, just like memories, just like regrets. You can't choose family, but you can choose whether to open the door when they knock. That night, my porch light was on for the first time in years, not because I was expecting company, but because I couldn't bring myself to sit in the dark. The soft yellow glow from the old bulb cast long shadows across the wooden planks, curling around the edges like an invitation I didn't mean to send. I was in the kitchen, watching the kettle rumble on the stove. Steam rolled gently from the spout like it had nowhere better to go. I stood still, fingers curled around the chipped counter, waiting for the whistle. That's when I heard it, the knock, firm, impatient, familiar. I didn't move right away. I let the moment stretch out, let the knock come again. And it did. This time harder. The kettle began to hiss. I turned off the burner and made my way to the door, my heart beating a rhythm I hadn't heard since I was a kid, waiting to be scolded. When I opened it, Sean stood there, hands on his hips, shoulders hunched like he'd just fought the wind to get here. Behind him, Haley stood in the half-light, arms folded, mouth tight. Her eyes scanned the porch like she didn't want to admit she recognized anything. "Nice place," Sean said, stepping forward without waiting for an invitation. "Didn't think you'd still be in town." "I didn't think you'd drive out here," I replied, keeping my voice level. He walked past me into the living room like it belonged to him. Haley followed, slower, quieter. She looked around like she was remembering a story someone else had told her. Sean turned on me before I could even shut the door. "You knew about this, didn't you? You knew what Dad planned." "No," I said plainly. "I found out the same time you did." He laughed, short and sharp. "Come on, Mike. You think I'm going to believe this whole innocent bystander act?" "I'm not acting," I said, "and I'm not arguing either." Haley sat down on the arm of the couch, her eyes fixed on the floor. "We just want to understand," she said, voice smooth. "Why would he do this? Why now? Did you talk to him before he died?" I looked at her, then at Sean. I could feel the air stretching between us, tight like a rubber band. "He made his choice," I said. "You can argue with that, not with me." "You always had a way of making yourself the victim," Sean snapped. "Guess now you're the hero too." "I'm not anything," I said steady. "I just came home." The room went quiet. The only sound was the wind chime outside, rusted and soft. Haley stood up and brushed her hands on her jeans. "Well," she said, "we'll talk again. This isn't the end of it." Sean lingered at the door. Just before stepping out, he turned back. His voice was low. "This isn't over." And I believed him. I stood there long after they left, watching the porch light flicker against the night. The kettle had gone cold, my tea untouched. I thought about how many times I'd imagined that moment, one of them showing up, saying exactly what he did. But none of it felt satisfying. None of it felt like justice. Sometimes it's not greed they hate. It's the idea that you mattered more than they thought you should. That maybe, just maybe, you weren't as invisible as they wanted you to be. I sat on the bottom porch step, let the chill soak through my jeans. And I wondered, not for the first time, if closure ever knocks, or if it just lets itself in. The folder was old, but the handwriting was unmistakably his. Neat, calculated, quietly angry. I found it tucked between a set of dusty ledgers and a brittle copy of the Wall Street Journal almanac. The label on the manila folder was handwritten in all caps, Legacy, Dorsey, as if it belonged in a vault, not a bookshelf layered in cobwebs and decades. The house was quiet by then. I was sitting in Dad's old leather chair, the one that creaked when he leaned to light his pipe, even though he never actually smoked indoors. The smell of stale tobacco still lingered, though, ghosting the edges of the room, like it didn't know how to leave. The study hadn't changed. Bookshelves framed the walls, more for show than for reading. His desk faced the window, even though the curtains were always closed. He didn't like distractions. He liked numbers. He liked control. And I realized, as I opened that folder, that he had been controlling the story even now, from beyond the grave. Dad never spoke in full sentences when it came to feelings. He wrote them instead, sometimes on note cards, sometimes in the margins of bank statements. And then he burned the paper when no one was looking. But this he left behind. The first few pages were dry. Standard financial planning, assets, transfers, stocks, projections, dates neatly typed, percentages double underlined. He'd clearly spent time thinking about how the estate would be handled. Clinical, precise, like he was managing a company, not closing the book on a life. And then, near the bottom of a page labeled Property Allocations, I saw it. Give Michael the house, he earned it, quietly. There was no explanation, no flourish, just that, tucked between a line about trust conversion and a reference to life insurance payouts. I sat still for a long while, reading the sentence over and over. He earned it. 2 words that sounded simple, until you spent your life wondering if he'd ever say them at all. In the margin, scrawled in that tiny, rigid handwriting, was something else. He stayed when others mocked him. That's more than success. It hit harder than I expected. I wasn't even sure what staying meant to him. Was it staying in town? Staying an artist? Staying in touch, even after he stopped returning my calls? I let the folder rest on my lap. My fingers brushed over the edge of each page, like I was waiting for something more to fall out, something more direct. But knowing him, this was his version of a confession. Not loud, not public, just etched in the quiet between spreadsheet lines. I leaned back, letting the old chair take my weight. The ceiling fan spun overhead with that uneven rhythm that reminded me of summer storms and power flickers. The room smelled like wood polish and the faint echo of regret. Behind the final page in the folder, I noticed a thinner envelope tucked into the back flap. It was cream-colored, sealed. On the front, in Dad's same tidy print, were the words, "Not to be opened until you're ready." No date, no name, just that. I turned it over once, twice. The seal was crisp, untouched. He had meant for it to be found, but not read, not yet. It felt like a test, or a dare. And for the first time since the will reading, I didn't feel angry. I just felt small. That envelope sat on the desk for the rest of the night. I couldn't sleep. I didn't even try. I just kept watching the paper under lamplight, wondering what kind of truth waits behind a sentence like that. People think inheritance is about money, but most of it isn't. Most of it is memory, wrapped in silence, tucked into folders, buried between what's said and what never had the chance to be. The room was silent, but I could still hear their disbelief bouncing off the wood-paneled walls. Even now, morning light slicing through the blinds like a reminder, I could picture Sean's laugh, Haley's narrowed eyes, the quiet hiss of the lawyer clearing his throat. The echo didn't fade when the room emptied. It just followed me home, curled up in the corners like dust. I sat in my kitchen, the only sound being the steady drip of the old coffee maker groaning its way through the morning. The mug in my hands was chipped, a souvenir from an art fair I barely remembered attending. My fingers wrapped around it like it was an anchor, like it had answers. On the table in front of me lay the official copy of the will, slid across by the lawyer with practiced neutrality. I hadn't read it again until now. The words felt colder the second time around, cleaner. They lacked his voice. The legal language tried to smooth the jagged edges of emotion, but I could still feel them poking through. And then came the last line. And may this end what was never spoken. That stopped me. What wasn't spoken? What did he think this inheritance, this grenade, was going to fix? I sat back. Let my mind run down every conversation we didn't have, every phone call he let go to voicemail, every visit that ended with him standing, hands in his pockets, watching me walk away. He used to say, "If you can't say it out loud, write it down. If you can't write it down, leave a clue." This felt like both. And neither. My phone buzzed across the table. Haley. You manipulated a dying man. Hope you enjoy the guilt. No punctuation, no hello, just a wound delivered in text form. I stared at the screen for a moment, then turned it face down. There was nothing I could reply to that wouldn't add to her narrative. And maybe that's what stung the most. I didn't have a defense that wouldn't sound like a lie. I poured myself coffee and tried to will the shaking out of my hands. Another buzz, this time a voicemail. Howard. I pressed play. Michael, this is Howard Travers. I meant to tell you yesterday, but with all the tension, I thought it better to follow up privately. There's another sealed letter addressed to you from your father. It wasn't part of the public will. He asked me to deliver it directly. Call me back when you're ready. I didn't move for a full minute, just watched the steam curl from the surface of my coffee. Another letter. One wasn't enough, apparently. One folder labeled Legacy didn't say everything he wanted to say. Or maybe it said too much, and now he wanted to say less. I looked over at the envelope still on the table from the previous night. The one labeled, Not to be opened until you're ready. And I wondered if the two were connected, or if this was going to be another trail of breadcrumbs that led nowhere. I picked up the envelope. The wax seal was deep red, pressed with his initials, FD, clean and deliberate. He always took his time with the details. I ran my thumb along the edge but didn't break it. Not yet. Sometimes knowing what's inside isn't the hardest part. It's knowing what it will do to you once you read it. I looked out the kitchen window. The sun had finally broken through the clouds, casting sharp lines across the sink, the stove, the worn-out tile. Everything looked too defined, too certain. And then, ding-dong, the doorbell. My body stiffened before my mind even caught up. I knew that ring, not the sound, but the timing. The kind that doesn't belong to neighbors or delivery drivers. I already knew it wasn't someone bringing bread. The envelope was still in my hand when I stood. Still sealed. Still heavy with whatever came next. It's strange how silence from the dead speaks louder than words from the living. Louder than texts. Louder than accusations. Louder than grief. And in that moment, standing in a quiet kitchen with an unopened envelope and a doorbell still echoing in my ears, I wasn't sure whose voice I feared more. His handwriting hadn't changed. Still surgical, still careful, still afraid to be messy. I sat in the studio with the letter unopened on my lap. The sky had turned the color of old slate, and the rain had just started. Soft at first, like it was trying not to interrupt. The windows were slightly fogged from the inside. One desk lamp lit the room in a cone of gold. The rest of the space dipped in that blue-gray nothingness that only comes right before night. I stared at the envelope. The seal had already been broken, my thumb shaking slightly when I'd done it an hour earlier. But I hadn't pulled out the paper. Not until now. The paper was thick, cream-colored, folded once down the middle. He didn't write on lined sheets, never did. Said lines were for people who couldn't keep order in their heads. His penmanship was sharp, measured, angled, like someone carving words instead of writing them. I'd only ever seen it on checks and Christmas cards. Never like this, never this many words. I took a breath and read. Michael, I don't know how to start this, so I'll just say it. I didn't know how to be a father to someone I didn't understand. I stopped there. It was the first sentence, and already it felt like a weight pressing into my chest. I thought about all the years I'd tried to translate his silence. Turns out, he'd been trying to translate me too. You were always more like your mother, he continued. Quiet, steady. You watched instead of spoke. I didn't know what to do with that. I didn't know what to do with you. He never said her name. Not once. After the divorce, it was like she'd been erased from the walls, and here, even now, she was a shadow in a sentence. Daniel needed chaos. You chose calm. Maybe I pushed him too hard. Maybe I didn't push you enough. Daniel, my older half-brother, from Frank's first marriage, the golden boy who lit fireworks in the backyard and left for California at 19. I hadn't seen him since Mom's funeral. I kept reading. You were the son who stayed. Not loudly, not out of obligation, just steadily, like a post in the ground, whether or not someone tied anything to it. I didn't say thank you, not once. So here it is, even if it's late. Thank you. I sat back in the old stool, letting the words breathe. The rain was coming heavier now, tapping against the roof in uneven rhythms. My fingers were damp with sweat. I thought of all the nights I'd spent in this studio, trying to paint something that felt like closure. But it never came. Because I was waiting for this, for a sentence, any sentence, that told me he saw me, that I wasn't invisible to the man who raised me by omission. Then the letter shifted. This house is your gallery now. Do with it what I couldn't. Fill it with color. Let people in. Open the damn windows. I almost laughed, almost. Because that was him, throwing an insult into something that sounded like permission. He couldn't say, I want you to thrive here. He could only say, open the damn windows. He ended with something that stuck longer than I expected. You were never less. I just never said more. That was it. No love, Dad, no signature. Just a final sentence that felt like the absence of everyone that came before it. I folded the letter carefully, slid it back into the envelope even though the seal was broken. I wanted it to feel complete, even if it wasn't. Just then, the breeze caught the edge of the window, nudging it open with a quiet groan. Cold air slipped in, followed by a rush of rain that hit the edge of the letter before I could stop it. I held the envelope up and watched as a corner darkened with moisture. Like the paper needed to weep, too. Sometimes apologies don't arrive in time to fix things, but they arrive in time to soften them. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough. The letter didn't heal anything. It just reminded me where the pain came from. I stood at the mailbox for longer than I should have. The air was crisp, wind like a whisper of leftover winter still clinging to spring. My hand hovered over the stack of mail, already knowing. You don't need to open certain envelopes to feel what's inside them. Legal paper has a texture, thicker, more intentional, like it's printed on judgment. The return address read some firm out of Columbus. Clean serif font, no warmth, just consequence. Back inside, I stared at the envelope as the kettle screamed on the stove. I didn't reach for it right away. I let it cry. When I finally opened it, the first line was all I needed. Notice of intent to contest will, filed on behalf of Sean Dorsey and Haley Monroe. So there it was. No surprise. Just the formal beginning of the war we'd all seen coming. The phone buzzed before the paper had even settled on the table. Haley. I let it ring twice before picking up. Michael, she started. No greeting, no pause. Her voice was tighter than usual, more clipped. Like each word had been measured, shaved, and sharpened. You'll be served this week, she said. Don't pretend you didn't see this coming. I leaned against the counter, looking out the kitchen window at the backyard I used to rake every fall. "Did you get what you wanted?" I asked. There was silence on her end, just for a second. Maybe confusion, maybe offense. "What I want," she said slowly, "is fairness." I laughed once, dry. "That's a new word for you. You manipulated him," she said. "The whole town knows it. The whole damn family knows it." "Then let them file it," I said. "Let the court read the same letter I did." Her tone dropped. "You'll lose everything, Michael. I promise you that." She hung up before I could respond. Not that I planned to. I didn't make toast that morning. Just poured my coffee into a travel cup and drove into town. Mabel's diner sat on the corner of Main, like it had since before my parents met. There was always a hum in there. Coffee refills, fork clinks, and whatever song the local country station happened to be playing. It smelled like fried eggs, burnt toast, and carpet cleaner. Somehow that combination felt like home. Tracy spotted me as soon as I stepped in. "Well, look who's breathing Glenridge air again," she said, smiling as she placed a napkin and menu in front of me. "Not sure how clean it is, but yeah," I muttered. She raised an eyebrow. "You hear about Evelyn?" I blinked. "What about her?" Tracy leaned in slightly, her voice dropping. "She was at the lawyer's office yesterday. The old one off Chestnut. Didn't look too happy either." I didn't say anything, just stirred my coffee a little longer than necessary. "She was carrying a folder big enough to knock sense into a judge," Tracy added. I nodded slowly. "Thanks, Tracy." She gave a gentle pat to the counter. "You let me know if you need a refill, or a lawyer with better morals." She walked off, leaving me with more questions than answers. But one stuck louder than the rest. What was Evelyn doing at a lawyer's office after the will had been read? I didn't finish breakfast. I left a 5 under the mug and drove straight home. The clouds had started rolling in again, gray layers folding over each other like a slow argument in the sky. Back in the garage, I walked past Dad's old Chevy, the one that hadn't moved in 5 years. I'd meant to call a tow truck or maybe donate it, but something always stopped me. This time, something else did. The back seat wasn't empty. A manila folder sat at an angle, peeking out from under a plaid blanket. I hadn't noticed it before. I couldn't remember the last time I'd even looked in the car. I opened the door. The smell hit first. Dust, old leather, and something vaguely sweet like cough syrup. I reached in and pulled the folder free. No label, just thick with contents, and heavier than paper should be. I stood there a moment longer, folder in hand, watching the storm gather in the distance. Sometimes the people you thought were done hurting you just hire lawyers instead. I didn't open it. Not yet. Because I wanted to see how far they'd go. He never let me drive his truck. But somehow he left something for me in it. Dad used to park the old Dodge like it was some kind of relic. Never touched it, never let anyone else touch it. He'd wax the hood twice a year, even though it hadn't been on the road in over a decade. There was something sacred about it to him, like the truck held more than engine parts. Maybe it held the years he didn't talk about. That night, I pulled the overhead chain in the garage and watched the light flicker to life, buzzing like it didn't want to be disturbed. Dust hung in the air, thick and lazy, stirred only by my steps and the faint breeze sneaking through a gap in the siding. The truck was still there, tucked in like an old man asleep in a recliner. Same cracked leather on the seats, same rusted trim along the door. I opened it slowly, half expecting some alarm of memory to go off. It didn't. I climbed in, flashlight in one hand, folder from the back seat still tucked under my arm. The cabin smelled like paper, grease, and aftershave. His scent, still clinging on. The glove compartment took some convincing. It groaned open, resisting like a child holding back a secret. Inside was a folder, thick and gray, labeled in Dad's neat, mechanical handwriting. Daniel, 2016, declined. I stared at the name. My brother's. Not Sean. Not me. Daniel. It took a second to remember what happened in 2016. That was the year Daniel had pitched some kind of startup. Something about fitness tech, I think. He'd made a big deal of it at Thanksgiving that year. Told us it was going to change everything. He just needed a backer. Dad had smiled politely that night, offered a second slice of pie, and said nothing else. I opened the folder. Inside were pages of typed documents, bank statements, loan projections, letters. One envelope was marked, "Refused March 18th." Inside, a rejection notice from Glen Ridge Trust Bank. Under that, another note. This one from Dad. Handwritten, terse. He needs to fall to learn, but Michael already knows where the ground is. My breath caught for a moment. So he had made a choice. He hadn't ignored Daniel. He'd considered it, weighed it, and said no. Silently, like he always did. While the rest of us read into his quiet like it was a blank page waiting to be written on. It was already written. We just never saw the ink. I leaned back in the seat, folder in my lap, flashlight balanced against the dashboard. Then I noticed the cassette player. It still had a tape inside. Dad hadn't used a phone much, never emailed. He wrote, he recorded, and apparently he'd left something else. I turned the key just enough to bring the battery to life. The radio crackled, then hissed. Then, if you're hearing this, I guess I didn't get to explain in person. I froze. It was his voice, not younger, not scripted, just Frank Dorsey. Straight from whatever year he'd decided to record his thoughts onto magnetic tape. He cleared his throat. I kept things from all of you, not out of malice, just out of not knowing how to say them right. The sound wavered, muffled by age. Daniel was always loud about wanting more. Sean thought he deserved it. Haley wanted peace but never paid for it. And Michael... There was a pause. A longer one. I could hear him breathe. You were different. You didn't demand. That scared me more than the rest, because it meant I might owe you something, and you wouldn't ask for it. I looked down at the folder, at the words he'd written. Michael already knows where the ground is. I hope by now you've seen the files. I didn't help Daniel, not because I loved him less, but because he wouldn't survive help. He needed to fail on his own. The tape clicked, then static, then silence. I sat in that garage, surrounded by rust and regret. My father had planned everything, silently, carefully, like always. No shows of affection, just locked compartments and recordings. But it wasn't just cold strategy. He had watched. He had chosen. Just never out loud. The breeze outside shifted, making the overhead bulb sway slightly. I could hear the creak of the rafter. Same sound from when I was a kid sneaking in to look at the truck when I thought he didn't know. Turns out, he always knew. He just never said it. I turned off the tape, but his voice stayed with me. He'd built a legacy like a blueprint, one line at a time. No emotion. No flourishes, just measurements and intentions. And me? I was still figuring out how to read the blueprint. The courthouse smelled like copy toner and denial. It was the same courthouse where I'd once paid a parking ticket for leaving Dad's truck too close to a hydrant. That day the clerk had offered me a mint and said, "These things happen." Today, no mints, no smiles, just a hallway lined with graying carpet, and faces too proud to admit they were scared. The Glen Ridge District Court wasn't big. Maybe 10 pew-like benches on either side, 2 flags behind the bench, and a wall clock that hadn't moved since, I don't know, the Clinton years. It was stuck at 2:47. Oddly poetic, like the place had given up on keeping time a long time ago. I sat on the left side, with Howard beside me. He didn't bring a briefcase, just a manila folder and a fountain pen. Said everything else was noise. Across the aisle, Sean and Haley looked like two headshots from a corporate brochure. Sharp suits, sharper glances. Haley's jaw was locked tight, her eyes fixed on some point just above the judge's chair. Sean. Well, Sean looked like he was still deciding whether to be furious or smug. Judge Wallace came in like a man already behind schedule. His robe had a coffee stain near the hem, and he adjusted his glasses 3 times before even looking at us. "All right, folks," he said, voice dry as toast. "We're here to begin review of the petition to contest the estate of the late Franklin Dorsey. Let's proceed." Sean's lawyer, a man named Grant Haskell, probably born in a bow tie, stood up first. He spoke like he was explaining math to children. "We contend that Mr. Dorsey was not of sound mind when he amended his will. There is no medical documentation supporting his capacity, and the sudden shift in beneficiaries is, frankly, alarming." Howard didn't flinch. He waited until Grant sat down, then rose calmly. "Your Honor," Howard began, "we have 3 years' worth of correspondence from Mr. Dorsey. Typed, dated, notarized in some cases. He may not have been expressive, but he was precise and deliberate. He was clear about his intentions, just not loud about them." The judge looked over his half-rimmed glasses. "I've read the documents. They're dry but competent, and there's no signature discrepancy." Grant objected, citing undue influence. Howard just nodded. "There is no evidence of coercion, no joint accounts, no recorded visits from Michael in the last year. If anything, the distance supports authenticity." The room fell into that awkward stillness courtrooms know too well. Judge Wallace leaned back. "I'm not ruling today, but I'll say this. So far, I see no fraud. We'll reconvene for the next hearing in 3 weeks. Parties may submit additional statements until then." Bang of the gavel. Just like that, a life was being judged in pieces of paper and carefully chosen words. We stood. I adjusted my jacket, suddenly aware of how much my palms were sweating. Sean walked by without looking at me, but just before he reached the exit, he stopped. "This was never about the house," he muttered. I turned toward him slowly. He didn't blink. "It was about you taking everything, again, like always." I wanted to say, "I never took anything. I just stayed when you all left, but I didn't. I just let him walk away." Outside, the wind had picked up. I pulled my coat tight and climbed into the car. The courthouse behind me looked even smaller now, like something out of a snow globe that had been shaken too many times. Back home, I tossed my keys into the dish near the door and dropped my coat on the old dining chair. I poured a glass of water, let it sit on the counter, untouched. The answering machine blinked. One new message. I pressed play. "Michael, it's Evelyn. We need to talk. Alone." Her voice was flatter than I remembered, but the word alone carried something sharp. "They say you learn who people really are when you fight over money. That's not true. You learn who they always were. Money just takes the mask off." The key she gave me was cold, just like her voice. Evelyn stood in the doorway like a statue carved from grief. Her blouse hung loose on her frame, and her hair, once dyed a calculated auburn, had grown out into streaks of gray at the roots. She didn't ask to come in. She just stepped aside, handed me the key, and said, "Frank kept too many things down there, including himself." The metal clicked against my palm as I turned it over. Heavy for its size. Familiar somehow. I remembered a box under the stairs when I was a kid. I remembered him snapping it shut one winter and telling me, "Not for you." Now here we were, years later, after funerals, after lawyers, after envelopes and half-said apologies. And suddenly, it was for me. We didn't talk on the way to the basement, just the thud of our feet on the narrow steps and the slight wheeze of the furnace. The air grew heavier with every step, the kind of damp weight that settled in the lungs and stayed there. The basement was just as I remembered, half-finished walls, chipped cement floor, one bulb swinging from a cord. Evelyn reached up and steadied it. The shadows shifted. There were boxes everywhere, stacked in uneven towers, labeled in that exacting slanted handwriting of Frank's. Taxes 98, plumbing, old, not yet. One box simply said, Eleanor. She didn't touch that one. Instead, she pointed to a wooden chest in the corner, worn, latched, and locked. She handed me a second, smaller key. Try this. It fit. The latch clicked, and the hinges gave a reluctant groan. Inside, the past sat quietly waiting. A photo album with cracked leather binding. A bundle of cassette tapes wrapped in an old handkerchief. 3 medals I didn't recognize, but instinctively knew he'd earned in silence. And one small notebook, covered in soft navy linen, the edges faded from time. We didn't speak for a while. Evelyn sat on the edge of an overturned milk crate, hands folded in her lap. Her gaze wasn't on me. It drifted around the room, like a ghost retracing the shape of something it once knew. "I used to hate how he looked at you," she finally said. The words didn't come sharp. They came slow, unraveling, heavy. It wasn't envy exactly, it was disbelief. Like, how could he have space for anyone else when he gave me so little? I didn't interrupt. She wasn't talking to me so much as she was excavating something. I wasn't kind to you, I know, but I was surviving my own exile in that house. That hit harder than I expected. Not because it hurt, but because it made sense. She looked older than I remembered. Not just in years, but in weight, some emotional gravity that had settled into her shoulders. She reached out and gently placed the journal in my hands. "He started writing in this after your mother died," she said. "Not every day, but when he couldn't sleep, when he didn't want to talk to me. It's all in there." I thumbed through the pages. No dates, just entries. Sometimes a paragraph, sometimes just a line. She stood slowly, knees cracking under the movement. "Read it, then decide what you believe." The light flickered once, then again, then steadied. I stayed in the basement after she left. Sat on the cold floor, back against the chest, the journal in my lap. Outside, the wind pressed against the windows upstairs. But down here, everything was still. Like the house was holding its breath. I opened to the first page. It simply said, "She had your eyes." That's why I couldn't look at you for too long. It's strange how the people who wound us the most are sometimes just trying not to bleed out themselves. He never wrote like an artist. He wrote like a man afraid someone might read too much. I lit a candle even though the lamp still worked. Maybe I wanted the flickering shadows. Maybe I didn't want the words to be too clear, too bright. I sat at my old desk, the one with the faint paint smudges from a decade ago, and opened the journal like it might bite. The first pages were stiff, aged, yellowed at the edges and soft in the middle, like they'd absorbed more than just moisture, maybe memory too. He didn't start with "Dear Michael," or even with dates, just thoughts, loose, strange, and stitched with pain. She left the windows open even when it rained, said the sound helped her breathe. I used to close them behind her. Now I'd give anything to hear her forget again. That was the first line. I hadn't thought of my mother in a while. Not honestly, not without flattening her into someone soft and vague. But that sentence brought her back whole, barefoot, laughing, scolding Dad in that way that wasn't really scolding. And yes, leaving windows open in spring. Page after page, Frank unraveled. Not in some big dramatic way. No confessions of secret families or hidden betrayals, just slow erosion. Michael watches everything, doesn't speak much. I don't know what he sees. Sean talks back, easier to argue than sit in silence, so I argued. Haley gets it from Evelyn, eyes like steel. That girl will never cry in front of anyone. And then this, scrawled in a rougher hand. I don't know how to father a boy who doesn't need fixing. I kept trying to fix him anyway. That one sat in my chest a while. I leaned back, let the candlelight wobble across the ceiling. The rain tapped the window like it had somewhere to be but didn't know how to get there. I let it in. The sound. The ache. The memory. I turned another page and saw her name again. My mother's. After Eleanor passed, I tried to turn the house into a schedule. Like if I could control the hours, the grief would behave. Michael stayed quiet, never demanded anything. I mistook that for peace. I swallowed hard. I remembered those years in silence. Him closing cabinets a little too hard. The scrape of his chair across the kitchen tile. The way he'd say good night like a chore. It wasn't until the very end of the journal that he used my name. Michael is the soul of this house. Sean was the fire. But Michael was the frame. I failed at fatherhood. If he still paints, maybe that's where I succeeded. That's where the ink stopped. No flourish, no signature, just white space. I sat there for a long time, candle almost out, my hand resting on that last line like it might disappear if I blinked. I didn't cry because it hurt. Not this time. I cried because someone finally said the thing I'd been waiting my whole life to hear, and it came from a hand that would never move again. The candle hissed and went out. And in the darkness, my phone buzzed. 10 missed calls, 1 voicemail. Daniel. His name lit up the screen like it belonged there. A decade and a half of silence, then suddenly, I need to see you. Now. Some regrets come with flowers and tears. Others come with a number you forgot you still had saved. He looked older than I remembered. Or maybe just more tired of pretending. Daniel was already sitting when I got to the bench, the one under the willow at the edge of the town park. We used to call it the quiet side, back when we were boys, and everything seemed too loud at home. The willow still leaned like it was hiding something. Maybe both of us. He didn't stand, just patted the spot beside him. No small talk, no handshakes. I sat, leaving that little bit of space brothers sometimes keep when they're not sure how much hurt the other is still holding. We stared ahead. A couple of kids tossed a frisbee in the distance. The leaves rustled like they knew better than to interrupt. I didn't call to fight, Daniel said eventually. I didn't come to win, I replied. He let out a breath, long and thin. You always got peace, he said. I got noise. That's what I resented. Not the house, not the will, just how still you seemed. I didn't know what to say, because I had been still, but not peaceful. I was frozen, I finally said. Still and scared aren't the same thing. He nodded slowly. I guess I never saw that. There was a silence. Not awkward, just cautious. I found Dad's journal, I said. He wrote about you. Daniel flinched. Yeah? He said you needed chaos, that you chased it, maybe just to feel something. Daniel looked down at his hands. He wasn't wrong. I reached into my coat and pulled out the journal. I'd marked a page. I read aloud. Daniel fought me. And maybe that was love too, just with sharper edges. He didn't say anything. but I saw his jaw tighten. Then he pulled a wrinkled envelope from his pocket and held it out. This came to my old address. I'd moved by then. Postmarked 2 years before he died. Never opened it. Figured it wasn't mine anymore. I took it. Still sealed. Frank's handwriting. Same careful script. Same blue ink. "You sure you don't want to read it first?" I asked. Daniel shook his head. "Whatever it says. He wrote it to you." We sat for a while longer, watching the kids now argue about whose turn it was. "I read what you wrote in the paper," Daniel said after a bit. "About Dad, about the will. You called him a man of few gestures but deep ones. That was fair. Hurt more than if you'd been angry." I glanced over. Fair is harder, sometimes. He gave a half smile. That's why it stung. We didn't hug, didn't promise to stay in touch. We're not that kind of family. But as he got up to leave, he said, "I think he wanted you to have the house because you'd never ask for it." And then he walked away, hands in pockets, like the wind had just gotten a little colder. I waited until he was out of sight. Then I opened the envelope. One word at the top. Son. No dear, no to, just son. And I didn't know whether to smile or break. Some letters aren't for explaining. They're just proof someone, somewhere, still knew your name. It was thin, sealed with a single strip of tape, but it felt heavier than the house itself. The sunlight came in low through the studio windows, painting long shadows across the wooden floor. The canvas behind me was half done, brushes drying in a jar, palette still speckled with the last color I couldn't quite get right. A mug of tea cooled beside me, untouched. I sat at the small table where I used to sketch as a kid. That table had seen more quiet than conversation. And now it was about to hold the final word from a man who rarely spoke first. The envelope crackled as I opened it. No fancy stationery, just a lined yellow page. Folded once. His handwriting, same as always. Tight, careful, with too much space between words, like he was trying to leave room for misinterpretation. "Michael, I didn't leave you the house because you were the best son. I left it because you were the one who understood silence." I stopped reading for a second. Let that sit. The others, Sean, Haley, even Evelyn, they filled every room with sound, with wants, with needs, with noise, but you walked through walls without disturbing the dust. I felt something shift inside me. Not pride, not vindication. Something older, sadder. I once rewrote the will. You should know that. Had it all going to Sean, but I never filed it, because the night I came home and you'd fixed the back steps without telling anyone, that's when I realized who'd still show up when I was no longer useful. I looked toward the back of the house. The steps were still there, my handiwork, uneven and unsanded. But they held. You were quiet, Michael, and I mistook that for softness. But silence isn't weakness. It's a kind of weather. Some people can live in it, others can't. He went on about the house. How it was too big for him the last few years. How he hated the echo but couldn't bring himself to sell it. I hope you'll fill it, not just with furniture, but with story, with color, with whatever comes after me. I hope it becomes art, not ashes. That was the last line. No signature, just the fold. I leaned back, stared at the letter like it might still change while I wasn't looking. Then I stood, walked to the hallway closet and pulled down the box I hadn't opened since the day after the funeral. His war medal, tucked under an old wool scarf. I brought a small nail, stood at the threshold of the studio, and hammered the medal gently into the wooden frame above the door. No plaque, no inscription. Just a small symbol, hung quiet, where the light could catch it if it tried hard enough. I stepped back, not sure what I was feeling. But I wasn't numb. Sometimes grief isn't loud. Sometimes it just breathes with you. The house creaked as I made tea again. And the next morning, just as the kettle started to hiss, there was a knock. Not loud, not frantic, just expectant. I opened the door to find Evelyn, her hair pinned back, eyes tired but soft. She held out a cardboard tray with 2 cups of coffee, and under her arm, carefully held, was a framed photograph. "I thought you should have this," she said. It was a picture of me, maybe 8 or 9, sitting beside Frank on the porch. I was painting something on a paper plate. He wasn't looking at the camera. He was looking at me, smiling. Legacy isn't what we leave. It's what others finally understand. I never thought anyone would want to walk through our pain. But they lined up. Quiet, curious, kind. The house smelled like lemon polish and old wood. That particular mix you only get when you clean not for yourself, but for company. The kind of scent that makes a place feel both cared for and nostalgic. I'd spent the better part of the week hanging things, canvases I'd never signed, notes Dad scribbled in the margins of receipts, even a broken clock he'd kept running with tape and hope. Every room told a different story. I let them. The living room held childhood photographs, war medals, his old boots polished and placed beneath the fireplace. The studio had my unfinished works, still incomplete, some only outlines, hung beside drawings from when I was 7 in crayon. I titled the section, Almosts and Maybes. People came, first a few neighbors, then folks I hadn't seen in years, a retired art teacher, the librarian who used to slip me books behind Dad's back. Some came with curiosity. Others came with something softer in their eyes, something like reverence. Evelyn stood in the kitchen, serving cookies from a plate she said was too ugly for guests, but too full of memories to throw away. Her voice was lighter now, almost airy, like the house had done something to her too. Maybe forgiveness has a scent. Maybe it smells like lemon polish and vanilla extract. Daniel arrived an hour in. He didn't say much, just handed me a baseball glove. Ours, from when we still believed in teams. I set it next to a photo of us, arms over each other's shoulders, missing teeth and full of sun. The kids from town made their own exhibit in the hallway, sticky notes stuck to the walls, with comments like, "This house feels warm," and "Your dad's truck smells like crayons." I didn't correct them, let them have their magic. At one point, I caught Evelyn standing alone in the hallway, staring at a painting of a tree I never finished. Just the trunk and one branch. No leaves. She smiled without turning around and whispered, "He would have hated this. That means it's perfect." I didn't laugh. I just nodded. And maybe for the first time, I understood her. Not as a stepmother, not as a rival, but as someone who had tried to love a man too silent to love back properly. We were both just survivors of the same weather. As the sun began to set, guests trickled out. Some left notes in the guest book. Others hugged me awkwardly, like they weren't sure whether this was an art event or a wake. I sat on the porch when the last car pulled away. The cushion beneath me sagged the same way it always had. A wind chime rang out above me, rusty but insistent. Daniel came out and sat beside me for a moment. He didn't speak, just passed me a beer, then stood and left without looking back. Sometimes, that's as close to peace as brothers get. Inside, Evelyn was humming. I thought about how strange it was. The house used to echo. Now it breathed. Just as I was about to close up for the night, I saw the envelope by the door. Brown paper, stamped from the county clerk's office. I opened it slowly, careful not to rip. Inside was a single sheet. Zoning permit approved. You may now operate the property as a permanent community space. Art, education, gatherings permitted. Home license granted for public use. I leaned back against the door. The house wasn't just a memory now. It was becoming a place where others could feel what we had once hidden. A kind of quiet revolution. Sometimes art doesn't fix the pain, but it gives it somewhere to live without hurting anyone else. The table was the same one from Thanksgiving, 1995. This time everyone stayed past dessert. I set the plates down slowly, one by one. Mismatched ceramics, old cutlery, cloth napkins folded with more care than style. The roast chicken smelled right, like Sunday afternoons that didn't end in shouting. Mashed potatoes sat in a chipped bowl, just the way Mom used to make them, and Evelyn had insisted on boiling too many carrots. "They're good for color," she'd said. The dining room looked fuller than it had in years, not just in chairs, but in air, in the way people exhaled. The old chandelier still buzzed faintly, and the candlelight softened everyone's edges. Evelyn sat at the head, not out of formality, just habit. Daniel was across from me, Haley next to him, eyes tracing the tablecloth like it might speak first. Sean sat closest to the door. I wasn't sure if that was coincidence or exit strategy. The first few minutes were quiet. Forks clinked, someone coughed. The smell of roast and thyme filled in for conversation. Then Evelyn raised her glass. "Two imperfect families," she said. No one argued. We drank. Daniel cleared his throat like he was pushing something bigger than mashed potatoes down. "Michael once took the blame when I broke Dad's window," he said. "I was 10. He was 14. Dad thought he did it, and he didn't say otherwise." He turned to me. "I don't think I ever said thanks." "You didn't," I said, smiling. "But you gave me your Halloween candy that year. I figured we were even." That got a chuckle out of Sean. He looked up, cleared his throat. "You painted that hallway blue," he said to me. "I hated it, said it looked like toothpaste." He paused. "Now I kind of miss it." I didn't expect that. Evelyn stood to grab more gravy, but lingered by my shoulder. "Your father never understood that blue," she said, "but I think he liked having to walk past it." We all laughed. Not loud, not long, but it was laughter. The real kind, not nervous or sharp, just warm. Later, Tracy from Mabel's showed up with peach cobbler. "You didn't think I'd let you throw a proper dinner without dessert, did you?" she said, setting the dish down like it belonged there. Everyone had seconds and thirds. Sean loosened his collar. Daniel offered to do dishes. Haley leaned back and asked if I ever thought about teaching art to kids. "No," I said honestly, "but lately I've been thinking I might." We didn't exchange grand apologies. No one made a speech, but there was something healing in the way we passed the salt. In the way Evelyn insisted the gravy boat was older than all of us. In the way Daniel washed and Sean dried, and Haley refolded the napkins even though they were just going back in the drawer. That night, after everyone left, I walked to the front door. Locked it like I always did. But this time, it felt different. It felt like I was locking up my house, not my father's, not someone else's past. Mine. Forgiveness doesn't always come in fireworks or hugs. Sometimes it looks like a half-cleaned table and laughter over burnt carrots. Sometimes it just means no one rushed to leave. Spring arrived quietly this year. No big storms. Just green returning to places I thought were done growing. The first daffodil pushed through the corner of the yard, where the soil always stayed cold longer. That patch hadn't bloomed in over a decade. But this year, something softened. Maybe the ground. Maybe me. I was on the porch swing again, coffee in one hand, pencil in the other. Just sketching. Nothing planned. No gallery in mind. Just the way light landed on the mailbox or how the neighbor's dog barked exactly 3 times before flopping down in the sun. Inside, A canvas was drying. I'd finished it the night before. It wasn't ambitious. Just a painting of this very porch. The swing, the chipped railing, the way the shadows fell in the early morning. I didn't sign it, didn't give it a name, just hung it on the wall next to the others. There was something about letting it just be. Every Saturday now, a group of teens from down the block stopped by. Kids who usually skated behind the grocery store or loitered near the gas station. One of them had asked if he could paint in the studio. I said sure. They come with backpacks and ideas and more energy than the old floors can probably handle. I set out brushes, leave snacks in the kitchen. I don't hover. I just make space. Sometimes that's enough. Evelyn stops by every Sunday. Brings coffee from that place near the courthouse, the one Frank never liked because they used compostable lids. She says less these days, but means more. Sometimes we sit in silence. Sometimes we argue about crossword clues. Last week, she left behind an old photo of Frank holding a fishing rod and wearing socks with sandals. She said, "Just in case you forgot he was human." I kept it. I still haven't repainted Frank's study. The walls are the same faded green. His old desk still smells faintly of pipe tobacco and lemon oil. I dust it, but don't touch the drawers. I tell visitors, some rooms aren't meant to be repainted. Most nod like they understand, even if they don't. A few weeks back, I submitted a short column to the local paper. They published it in the Sunday edition, under the heading Community Voices. I called it, "What We Leave Behind Isn't Always What We Intended." It wasn't poetic. Just a few paragraphs about the house, about finding things you weren't meant to find, and forgiving people who didn't ask to be forgiven. People stopped me at the grocery store. Some mailed me letters. One woman wrote, "My father left me a shed full of broken clocks. I hated him for years. Now I wonder if he just didn't know how to fix time." I pinned that one above the sink. Sean called last Tuesday. Nothing urgent. Just wanted to know if I still made that spiced cider we used to drink as kids. Said he might stop by next time he drove through. He didn't say when, and I didn't ask. Daniel texted a photo of his daughter holding a paintbrush. Caption. She says Uncle Michael would know what to do with this. I smiled. Didn't reply right away. Just looked at the image for a long time. And last night, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and wrote a letter. Not for a court, not for an estate, just a letter. Addressed it to an old P.O. box my mother used when she sold crafts at flea markets. I knew it wouldn't get picked up, but I mailed it anyway. It ended with one line. I think you'd be proud of how it all ended up. Sometimes inheritance is a house, sometimes it's just the chance to write the ending yourself. You know, looking back, I spent years thinking that fairness would come with answers. That one day someone would hand me the missing pieces and everything would make sense. But life doesn't work like that. Sometimes you don't get clarity. You get quiet. And in that quiet, you start building something new. If you're sitting there with a story that never got closure, maybe it's not too late to give it continuity. Not all families get repaired. But sometimes healing doesn't mean fixing the past. It means choosing what you do next with what's left. So here's what I've learned. The legacy you leave isn't just in the things you pass down. It's in the way people feel when they think of your name. If this story made you reflect, leave a 1 in the comments. Let me know where you're watching from. I'd love to know which state you call home. And if you've ever had to rewrite your own ending, tell us about it below. And hey, if these kinds of stories speak to you, don't forget to subscribe. There's more to come. Always.